All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Hopefully, this is a Friday for you. We are just getting into the spring season, and there are some buds coming out of the window. So I am super excited. And on that note, I'm excited to talk to Jeff Love, who is our guest today. Jeff is a real estate attorney and investor from, and let me get this right, Gibbs, Giddin, Locker, Turner, Sennett, and Whitbrot. That is quite a mouthful. Jeff, thank you for hopping on the podcast.
I'm happy to be here. You got it. You got it pretty darn close. And it's, hopefully we can add a couple more names in the future just to make it even worse.
Is that how legal, law firms always work? Is that once a new partner comes on board, they just start adding the last names to the name?
You think that's bad? Entertainment law firms, they've got 9, 10 partners because everybody wants their name on it. We're at the point where we're going to go with Gibbs Giddin because we've got too many. It's too much of a mouthful. But
there's got to be some branding person on your team that's just like, all right, guys, this is enough. We gotta shorten it up a little bit.
Yep.
Right on. Well, yeah, thanks for hopping on the show. As I told you before we got on here, we like starting with stories. We like to hear how people kind of got to where they are. So why don't you take us back to the beginning of your story? How'd you get into real estate?
Well, if you ask my parents, it was building blocks. It was always building things.
Reasonable. Yep. Legos.
I don't know if that was really true, but that's what they tell me now. For me, it was really just in high school. I always liked real estate. We had a bunch of family friends that were developers, and they're all successful and they built things. So to me, it was really just seeing, that tangible, real, real estate. Everyone has it, whether it's, you're living in your house, you're in your office, you go out to dinner, it's real estate. So I actually, after college, I went to law school with the intent to become a real estate developer. Okay. I wanted to learn about contracts. I wanted to see how it worked and thought, hey, I'd be a lawyer for a couple of years and see the legal side of it. And then I'd go off and develop projects and be a principal in a real estate company. Was it 13, 14 years later, here I am still on the legal side. Because I think it fits my personality more, kind of like to be behind the scenes, and I'm not stuck on one project. I've got 10 or 15 different ones at the same time for clients and get to work on deals in Los Angeles, Nevada. I have a deal right now in Tennessee for clients and just helping them across the country and different types of deals too, where they're doing development, whether, it's something in an opportunity zone, it's a short-term rental. So that's really just appealed to me to help clients at different stages of projects, different size clients. So I've invested kind of on my own as I've got more experience, but the legal side seems to be where it fits me the best. And I just enjoy helping the clients grow their companies.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, we always say on the podcast that you stick to your strengths and hire your team around you to fit in all the spaces that you aren't an expert at. And if you're an expert at law, that's where you go and that's where you stick to your strengths. So love to hear that. It sounds like you're an active investor. You have that fourplex. You are out there in the field. At what point did you start buying your own properties?
Started about 5 years ago. And where we started is we're in Southern California, my wife and I. So it's an expensive market. It's not your typical investment where you're really focused on cash flow. We're right by the beach. So our first fourplex was, almost kind of a backwards investment, I'll call, where it's really a long-term hold. It's not about the cash flow. It was really for our kids. And we, the way we established the structure is our kids are right now 2, 4, and 7. And together they own 15% of the property.
That's a crazy house.
Yeah. 2, 4, and 7. It's crazy life, added the sports and stuff. But for that particular investment, it was really hold for the long term. We'll pull money out, buy another one. And the idea, in 25, 30 years, we'll have a property to leave to each of the kids. So for that type, and then, we're in other passive investments, other markets that we look at more for kind of the cash flow. Yeah. So kind of a mix for both, which I like because it's, the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. it's not all for appreciation. It's not all for cash flow in different markets. So that's kind of been, at least, my wife and I, our strategy for our personal real estate investments.
Yep, yep, that makes sense. Well, right on. Let's shift gears and talk the legal side of real estate. And law, the legal side of real estate to me is always that thing that you're kind of reticent to put your money into until you really need it, and then you're like so thankful that you spent money on on creating that purchase agreement or your leases, whatever it is that you need to be the documents that you need created or worked. It's very important. And so the first step in the legal process is always the purchase agreement from the real estate perspective. And that can come down in a lot of different structures. So let's talk about structuring deals and your clients, how you see them structured, what are the best structures for certain type of deals. Just kind of walk me through when it comes to lease options, seller financing, et cetera. What are the best structures that you've seen used?
Right now, it just depends on the market and depends on the type of deal. A lot of times we'll get involved even at the LOI stage, if we're
Oh, okay.
talking about if it's a, big purchase or a lease, because by the time you get to the purchase agreement, there could be a material term that wasn't put in there. So for example, I'll give you in California, a lot of times with leases, we have what's called Prop 13, and it means, our taxes, it doesn't get reassessed. It goes up 1 or 2% a year. Well, other states, it's being reassessed every year. So you can imagine, a big warehouse in Los Angeles you bought in the 60s, you're paying, much, tens of thousands of dollars less in
Hmm.
taxes. And a lot of times in leases, tenants will want what we call Prop 13 protection, saying, hey, you sell the building, I want to keep that property tax base. I don't want you to hit me with a $50,000 tax bill.
Wait, so pause it real quick. So in California, if I'm getting this right, when you own a property, it's the property taxes do not go up more than 2% per year. One to
That's
two
right.
percent.
One to two
Really?
percent. It depends on, the school fees and that city that you're in. But every couple of years they put it on the ballot to try to get rid of it.
Yeah.
They tried this last election, it didn't pass. So like you buy your home for $1 million and 20 years later it's worth 2 million, it doesn't get reassessed. It gets reassessed at 1 to 2% a year. So there's millions of dollars, the cities and counties want to get after, but that was passed in the 70s. And that
Interesting.
proposition says it's based on the purchase price with that incremental increase every year.
And so when you sell the property, that's when it's reassessed.
It gets reassessed on a sale or major construction.
Interesting.
So
Huh.
you can
Okay.
imagine a lot of the deals, tenants want protection, buyers want protection. So it's things like that that we often do want to negotiate early on in like an LOI before you get to a purchase agreement or a lease, because then it's sometimes harder to go back and renegotiate certain terms like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's a thing that I had no idea about. And if I didn't have a lawyer on my side, I wouldn't even know to put that in the contract. So case in point. But um shoot, I was just thinking about a question that I had. Oh, clauses that you add to a contract. What are some clause, like, everybody has their own purchase agreement that they use when they go out there into the field. Most people that I've seen on the commercial side won't use the state version. And so what clauses do you see missing from a lot of people's purchase agreements that you think that would really benefit the seller or the buyer to be added?
The biggest one is for a seller is making sure you have a good limitation of liability clause,
Mm,
especially when you get into commercial or, 5+ multifamily. Um, you don't want to sell your building and then have the buyer come because you breached a representation and you lose the entire purchase price. Why'd I sell the building? So a lot of times we will limit the seller's liability, and it ranges based on the deal, but 2, 3, 5% of the purchase price, and that's the cap. So, absent fraud or something really bad, if I just breached a representation and I didn't know about environmental issues or title something, that's going to be my cap. And that protects me as the seller, knowing that, hey, I can sleep because I'm not going to lose the whole value. um, you know, the flip side for this buyer is, I want to make sure that I've got protection. I'm doing my due diligence, but I want to know what the seller knows. So I'm really going to focus on those representations to make sure I know everything they know. And I'm also going to push back on that limitation of liability clause and make sure that if they did breach it, I have some type of recourse against the seller, and it's not going to be some shell LLC and the money's all gone. That I actually have, some recourse if the purchase agreement and the terms we agreed to turn out not to be accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I'm always nervous about when signing any purchase agreement, is those warranties. I mean, on my side and the seller side, because I mean, I went through a sale recently. Literally, I think it was the day or the day before we closed that my facility got completely destroyed. Just completely destroyed. Somebody went in there, a group of thugs went in there and just stole everything from all the different self storage facility units, and that canceled the contract. But it was on closing. I think the papers had already been signed, and so it was a big
Wow.
like legal question. But in the end, I just said, it's destroyed. I get it. You can walk away. No harm, no foul. But that's just to say, when you don't have certain warranties in there, certain clauses that protect you as a buyer or a seller, things could get sticky if the facility is destroyed or harmed, and you're still on the hook for purchasing it. So let's also talk. I want to talk about wholesaling, because that's something that a lot of single family people do, and it's kind of a legal gray zone in my mind. Um, I don't know about specifically California, but in your experience, you can wholesale commercial and residential properties. What are the different restrictions, if state by state? Does wholesaling work across the board every state, or are there certain states that it's not considered, it's not considered legal?
I gave you the lawyer answer. Unfortunately, it depends on the
Yeah.
state
Yeah.
because each state, we have our own Department of Real Estate and those laws kind of go down. Sometimes you have county and city laws as well. For the most part, there's no restriction. If we're just
Okay.
going to talk about a general sense, you know, you have a contract with the seller. There's nothing that prohibits you from kind of flipping that property. I actually have a client that's doing it in the commercial context. They are buying it from kind of the wholesaler in New Mexico and there's no issues. And when I went through the contract with him, I just said, the most important thing is making sure that, the terms from the actual seller kind of flow down to you, that you have enough due diligence time, the representations that kind of the wholesaler really is the middleman, but everything is, like I said, flows down to you. So
Yeah.
we went through that, no issues. But it fortunately depends because, I'll give you the kind of the completely off topic, but crazy example. If you went back to the COVID moratoriums we had in California, every county was different. Cities were different. State was different, and you had federal. So it was an absolute nightmare to kind of reconcile all of that. And that's the same type of thing when you're doing any real estate deal like wholesaling. Just because the state allows it, is there some specific type of local restriction? And cities have the ability to do that. So it is important, if that's your business and you're in a certain market, make sure, you're actually just doing a, quick search to make sure that you're not missing some type of restriction that you get caught up on.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. COVID was definitely an interesting time, for everybody when it comes to leasing and evictions and all that stuff. So, um, glad that's over. We've moved past that a little bit. When you with all your clients that you work with, I mean, I know you guys work with a ton of them from different sectors, and single family, multifamily, commercial, development, whatever. What are the biggest legal roadblocks that you see people running into?
It actually follows, real well with kind of the lesson you give in the shows is not having your team in place.
Mm,
It doesn't matter, if you're small or big. I've got big clients, they think they're big. They don't want to spend, money on, insurance or legal fees because they've done it before and they've run into issues. I've got, new clients that are they don't know what they don't know. So, they don't have that good accountant that can help them with their, operating agreement in an LLC. And it's a complex waterfall because it's a syndication and they have investors and they think, their normal accountant that's helping them with their tax return can do it and they run into issues. Other clients that are doing development, they're not overseeing their contractor enough,
mm,
and there's delays because they're just not on top of it. So really, I think no matter where you are in, sophistication, size, it's having that biggest issue is making sure you kind of know what you don't know And having that team in place, whether it's, taxes and accounting, legal, insurance, a broker to help you find deals, just, someone on your team that does underwriting and you're better at property management, just having that in place, no matter what size you are, um, it really helps you because then you can focus on what you're good at, which we talked about earlier.
Yep. Is it still, when I first got into real estate, the suggestion was that every property should be in its own LLC, and that's the wisdom that I've been following for my own career. Every property I buy, I put it in an LLC, but I've heard that kind of that suggestion has changed over time. Is that still what you recommend your clients to do, to put properties into individual LLCs, or is there some other structure that you guys like to use?
It depends on the client. I have one, very, very wealthy guy, real estate across the country. And, he was up to 25, 30 LLCs and he just threw up his hands and said, I've had enough.
Yeah,
It's
it's
too
just
much to
all the
manage.
exactly
Well,
the
it's too many,
paperwork is just
it's a
ridiculous.
lot of paperwork. You're doing annual reports at different states. You have to kind of qualify those LLCs, different state tax returns. So, he took them all and put them back into one and said, you know what, I'm comfortable with the risk. I've got insurance, and that worked for him. Other clients, we do have them in each LLCs. The When I recommend different LLCs or glue in partnerships, it's really for, two reasons. One, there's a property has specific risk.
Mm,
You've got an apartment building, a lot of coming and going. There's potential for, tenant to have a party, an Amazon delivery to slip and fall, where you've got extra exposure versus like a retail strip mall and your tenant's indemnifying you for everything.
mm,
Or a property has an environmental concern. It was an old dry cleaners, it's near a gas station. I don't want that property to expose my other assets. So I'm going to keep that separate. And I also keep it separate if, I have investors. That's like the number one way to keep it separate. If I've got different investors on different deals, I need to keep it separate because, they're different investors. So I look at each one differently because in California, for an LLC, you're paying a minimum of $800 in franchise taxes to create that LLC.
yeah,
If it's just, two single family rentals and there's not same, it's just us or the same partners, nothing really, nothing bad that's going to expose me. I might just keep them in the same one and save the money.
yeah,
Um, so you want to look at it. That was the wisdom, but when you really scale, it becomes really hard to manage when you have 30 companies and each one's its own business with its own tax return, potentially its own annual filings, keeping the name straight. It becomes a lot.
yeah, yeah. I focus on self storage, mobile home parks, and RVs. And so every one that I buy, I've been putting them into specific LLCs, but it's just, you're right, it's becoming a nightmare. And I want a better way to do it because the paperwork is just, in my mind, not worth it. And I don't see, so it sounds like that is the reason that you would do it, to protect yourself if one facility had an issue, and that would protect the other facilities from being exposed to that same thing. Um, does it matter if it's across state lines, or should, I mean, you mentioned like if you have multiple properties across the United States, different states, can you still put them under one LLC, or is it more advised to split it up by state, split it up by asset class? And this is assuming that you don't have partners. Let's just say it's just you owning properties, and one person, one entity owning properties. Should you put them all in an LLC by state? Is there another way to group it, or what would you suggest?
I think either one will work. When it comes across state lines, or again, any state, if I'm doing business in that state and I'm a California LLC, I need to register to do business there.
Mm,
And it's a gray area because, a lot of times, depending on the investment, are you really doing business? But, the safe answer is yes. I'm a landlord, I'm renting out this building. So if I'm going to have to qualify to do business there anyway, then I might just create, a Washington LLC and a California one, or I might group it by asset classes, like you said. You know, Certainly don't think you need to go down to one, but instead of having 10 LLCs, maybe you've got three, maybe you've
yeah,
got four, and it helps manage that. Still segregating it makes it easier for me. You know, I've got self storage LLC. Well, obviously I know what's going in that one versus my short term rentals. Um, and that kind of helps mitigate the risk. And it's always a fine line between the asset protection your entity gives you versus insurance.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
I could have good insurance, I could have an umbrella policy, and you know, there's very, very little risk that it's going to be beyond those limits. But you never know. And a lot of insurance policy, there's exclusions, you may not know of. COVID showed that with restaurants, there were tons of exclusions, and a lot of people got really burned because they thought they were insured and they weren't.
Mm,
That's why the benefit, the common kind of knowledge or advice is, have the insurance and, an entity where it limits your liability. So they have to not only exceed that insurance, but then my only exposure is what that particular LLC owns, which was, one property or two properties. I'm not exposing my entire portfolio, just what
yep.
that particular LLC owns.
Yep. That makes sense. And if you're talking about personal liability, do you generally suggest people put all of, say, you have each property in an LLC? Do you suggest they put them into a trust or into an umbrella LLC or anything like that?
Usually, a lot of time it's a good question because a lot of people get confused with what a trust does. And your typical, family trust, it doesn't give you any liability protection.
Oh, okay.
It's an estate planning tool where so I don't have to go to probate
Right.
and
That makes
spend the
sense.
money with that. It's going to go directly, to my children, because they're the beneficiaries of that trust. And it's a great tool for that, but it's often misconstrued that it protects the assets and it doesn't. So the real liability protection tools is, you have a limited partnership, you have an LLC, and then to get through that, the only assets that are at risk are what it owns. To get, personal exposure, they'd have to what's called piercing the corporate veil, kind of a funny legal saying, and that means they can go through the entity.
Mm,
Basically, the entity doesn't exist, and that can only happen if you're commingling bank accounts. You're not treating it like a separate entity, which is another important thing because a lot of times I'll see clients, they'll create an LLC for their property and they start running all these personal expenses through it.
mm,
And that's fine, if they're legitimate, they're related to the company. But if you're just treating it like another bank account, you've just destroyed the whole purpose of the LLC because a plaintiff's going to come, they're going to, if they were going to sue, that LLC is going to be pierced and you're going to be personally exposed.
interesting. Okay, that's something I didn't know, and it's a good nugget to take. So if you do, as the owner, you own these LLCs, there are profits that are being made. So how do you suggest the owner take money from a bank account from the profits that have been generated by that property? Owner distributions
Mhm.
or what other way? You just don't want to use like your debit card to purchase something from the bank account directly. You want to transfer the funds to your personal account and then use those funds. Is that right?
If that's, yeah, if you were going to use it for a personal expense, like dinners, you can expense some of them. But if I'm, if I'm going to Bora Bora on a personal trip, nothing related to my entity, I don't want to use the same bank account for my LLC or use my credit card for my LLC because that's a personal expense.
Mm,
If I need the cash for that, I'm just going to make a distribution to myself from my LLC and as a personal expense. So it's really, you treat it like a separate business that it is. You can expense, if you have a work truck and you're using it for your business, you have dinners from, your marketing brokers, those are all fine, but you really want to draw the line when it's a really personal expense,
yep.
just like any business, and keep that separate. Because
Yep.
if it's treated as one and the same, that's really when you run into issues and you can risk having a plaintiff kind of pierce that veil as we talked about.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. Right on, man. Well, hey, I took a peek at the clock. It looks like we are rounding it down. Before we move on, though, I want to ask about your personal investing and what the horizon looks like for you. What's your guys' next steps?
Our goal is really to buy a property every 5 years,
Okay.
outright, not to invest in passive, so that way, you know, when we retire, it's kind of my, another form of retirement savings, when I'm ready for that age. I love to have 6, 7 properties that we're getting the cash flow from. We've to date, we've really focused on 2 to 4 unit multifamily because everyone's been a renter. We know it. We know the area that we're in. We were renters. We know what it rents for. We can, manage it ourselves. We can find tenants. So it's really been easy. I've loved that kind of 30-year fixed mortgage. You get it, you forget it, and then over time I can pull money out of it. So that's been our goal. And then in addition, investing in, passive investments, syndications to get exposure to different geographic locations, different asset classes. So hopefully, down the road, we've got a nice diversified real estate portfolio.
Perfect. I love it. All right, it's time to move to the quick question round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. It starts with books or any form of education. Give me two recommendations, one for general life wisdom, one for real estate.
General Wisdom, How to Win Friends and Influence People is
That's a
an
good book.
old book. You probably heard it before, but it's worth saying again. I think it's my favorite book with it's real estate and non-real estate, really, because it's dealing with how to deal with people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's life and that's real estate. Real estate, you're dealing with tenants, you're dealing with brokers, you're dealing with sellers, how to negotiate, how to deal with them. Probably best book you can read.
Yeah.
Um, not not a non-real estate. I'll just throw it out there because it helps me every single day, and it's really old school. It's not tech. Is I kind of write down my tasks.
Okay.
From a legal perspective, I put it on a notepad. I've got 10 things to do today because the phone rings. I've got emails. If I don't do it, I'm never going to get it done. And it might be silly. It might be old. Putting it down there, one, crossing it off makes me feel good. Like I've got through certain
Little hit of
things.
dopamine right there.
It is, I've got already this morning, I've got through a couple things and it's good. I'm getting through the list and I know what I have to do.
Yeah.
And that makes me get through the day. So if you ever, if you're one of those people that are not getting things done or kind of losing track of time, try just making an old school list.
Yep.
Can't
Yep.
recommend it enough.
I love that. And yeah, How to Win Friends, Influence People. That's one of my favorite books too. I never liked the title, but man, the content in that book is so good. It's just how to be a good person, really, is the content, but it does it in a way that really makes sense and is actionable. So good recommendations. I'm going to move us on to the next question, and this is for your younger self. So let's go back to the Jeff who was just getting out of law school. Go to him, look him in the eye, give him one piece of advice moving forward.
Uh, well, that's a good one. Is you can't be afraid to take the first step. I think
Mm,
if I would have loved to start investing even earlier, it's still nerve wracking, and it's really across the board. Like I'll take 20 seconds. My father-in-law, he could have bought these buildings for his business, decades ago for 50, $60,000 in LA. Now they're worth 10, 15 million. But he was always scared because that was a lot of money at the time. But
yeah.
now look at it today.
Yeah.
What are housing prices going to be for our kids? So, I wish I had that kind of mantra, the first one's always going to be the hardest, the most scariest. You got to do it. And if I had known that earlier on, I would have been, 10 years further in my investing journey.
All right. Whoever is keeping track, I've said this on every episode. Pretty much everybody that comes on says they wish they got started earlier. So add another jot down there for somebody who said they wish they got started earlier. And if you are listening to this podcast and you're thinking about getting started, this is the message. Go out there, get started, just get a deal done. It's the first one that's always the hardest, and then it gets a lot easier. So that's the message for the day. And that moves us to the next question. And this is about the US. It's a big place, a lot of opportunity out there. Give me the metro, the city that you are most excited about investing in today.
I think it's still Southern California, LA, specifically kind of Redondo Beach, the beach cities where I am. It's because it's my backyard. You can't
Yep.
overstate that enough. Knowing where a lot of people, we're investing in different states we've never been, which is good if you have the time and knowledge about it, but you really need to know where you're investing
Yeah,
and
for
where you
sure.
live, especially like I said, if it's multifamily and you've been a renter, the area, that gives you one leg up because you understand what you're doing, you understand the market.
Yep. Side note there, what do you think about the California markets? Do you think that there's going to be a crash there? Do you think, I've heard so much about commercial, especially downtown San Francisco just being vacant and, things are going to go under. But what do you think about house prices? Do you think they're going to be stable, increase, decrease? What's your crystal ball say?
They're still stable. There's just still such a lack of inventory because
Mm,
in California we have such a increase in prices, and to sell, you've got a big hit with capital gains, and interest rates now are higher, so people are not selling, and if you're not selling, the inventory is lower. So the houses is really going to stay the same or go up. I think that's where that's going. It's a different story with commercial. Like you said, office, LA is the same, where you've got high vacancy rates and people not really wanting to go back into office space. That they are trading at much lower numbers and people are taking losses.
yeah.
So it depends on the asset class that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually just read an article yesterday. It was this I can't remember which. It was one of those big firms out there that owns office, and they just sold two towers in, I think it was San Jose or something like that, for a loss, which is, they bought it in 2014 and they're selling it at a loss now, which blows my mind because 2014 to now, that's a huge upswing. Should have been a huge upswing, but now I guess not. So crazy times. But
Yes.
that moves us to the next question, and this is about finding deals. Every real estate transaction starts with finding that deal in the first place. So, what's your favorite way to find good deals?
I think my network,
Yeah.
whether it's brokers, accountants, everyone knows someone. And, a lot of times when it comes to market, it's you got competition, the price may be there. Finding, especially if you're looking for off market deals that are coming, just getting feelers out there and letting people know that you're looking. That's when you really can find that kind of great deal.
Yep. Relationships. It's what real estate is about. Next question is about relationships, but it's about mentors. None of us are islands. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. So, who is one mentor who has contributed significantly to your career today?
I think it's one of the partners when we were struggling to stay at a law firm, the third one, Bill Loker. He's always been a mentor. He's a real estate investor as well. And, he was the one that kind of gave me the idea of giving an interest to your children, let
Mm.
them learn about real estate, kind of get that out of your state, and just how to deal with people, deal with clients, deal with investors. I've learned a great deal from him, and always appreciated his advice.
Right on. I love it. All right. This next one, second to last question, is about your strengths. We are all gifted with strengths that we uniquely provide this world. So, what is your Superman strength?
That's a really good one. I think it goes back to, I hate to repeat things, but kind of knowing what I don't know. I'm the one where I'm trying to build a shed in the backyard and I'll give up my hands and I'll say, you know what, I got to call a handyman because I can't do it. I'm going to end up breaking something. So it has not always been like that. I used to just, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to pay for someone, my job, I get it all done and not utilize other attorneys to help. But as I've got more experience, it's, life is short, kind of focus on what you're good at. And although it may not be kind of a strength in the typical sense, it's the strength is knowing what I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's actually a hard one to realize and to let go of. But boy, does it help when you're able to just delegate things and focus on, the contracts, things that you are good at.
Yep. I'm going to call that strength wisdom because that is one of the
It's
most
great.
important strengths to have. That leads us to the final question. This one is for the listeners. I'm sure people want to reach out, get in contact with you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Email is probably the most responsive, or check out our website. My email is jlove@gibbsgiddon.com.
Cool. jlove@gibbsgiddon.com. I will put that link in the show notes. So if y'all want to reach out to Jeff, just go ahead and click the more in the description. It'll pull down the full description, and in there you can find Jeff's email. All right, man. That wraps it up. Thank you very much for hopping on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For everybody who's here with us today, thank you guys for showing up. You are the reason we do this. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever, reach out to me, Gabe at the realestateInvestingClub.com. And if you guys want to support the show, all we ask is you give us a like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Other than that, I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic week. Enjoy the spring. It's coming up on us. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.